recently I've been choosing some more provocative titles for my presentation. Not as provocative as I had about 5 years ago. I did a talk for the King's Fund called it Killing Digital, which was definitely quite provocative. But I'm a digital professional. I was a chief information officer for an arm's length body for Health Education England for 9 years before the merger into NHS England. But the reason I'm talking to you now is in my capacity as the person who runs something called the NHS Digital Academy. I've got a couple of slides about what that is. So we're there really as experts around digital education. So we have historically researched, designed and delivered educational products. They vary massively in terms of how long they are, who they're aimed for, and how in depth they are. But all of them are unified by their goal, which is to say it's trying to help the NHS and staff within the NHS realize benefits of digital more and minimize any harm that might come from digital. And you'll explain why I say both of those two things when I start getting into my slides. Keenly, we want to try and make sure all of our education is delivering value. That is quite a trick. And I don't think we're completely there, but it's definitely our ambition to make sure that we can measure end outcomes of the education we provide. We've got a bunch of products. You might have heard of the Digital Health Leadership Programme. That's, in fact, in the minds of many, entirely synonymous with the NHS Digital Academy. The first 3 cohorts were called the NHS Digital Academy before I borrowed the brand for a slightly broader collection of activities. That's a 1-year postgraduate diploma aimed at chief information officers, chief clinical information officers and aspirants thereof. But we've also got products aimed at boards, products aimed at what I might call the more junior digital and data staff, and products aimed at people who aren't digital and data staff at all. So things like our clinical safety work is aimed more at generalists, and we financially support some of the work of the digital skills development networks. There is, of course, one for your region. There is one for every region, 2 for the Northeast. And they collectively deliver more than 100 courses, different courses. And last year they delivered it to more than 2,300 digital folk. So that's kind of what we do. And this is our, really, we're training the NHS to do digital better. That's what we're there for. But what I think you're going to be more interested in is the research that we've either conducted ourselves or we've pulled together. And I'm going to present to you for over the next 15 minutes or so those distilled findings, which I think point towards some interesting conclusions. And I'd love to talk to you about what you make of it. So firstly, we have talked for a good couple of decades now, probably more, about the opportunity that digital provides. It's absolutely there. This is a demonstration of something called Moore's Law that some of you may well be familiar with, and it is the demonstrable doubling of processing power over time. So it's a logarithmic graph. If you have a look at the scale on the left, when you see a straight line on a logarithmic graph, it's a true exponential change. And roughly every 2 years, there's basically roughly twice as much processing power for a chip of the same size and the same cost. This trend continues to the modern day. So this graph happens to go up to 2016, but it's continued. And if you have a look in the press, it will be absolutely festooned with either people saying Moore's law is broken or Moore's law is continuing. And nonetheless, we are seeing still a doubling of processing power roughly every 2 years. So there's this tremendous opportunity, and as digital professionals, we keep on talking about what the opportunity digital technologies will provide us now and in the future, if only we just adopted it. But it's not our own or our staff's lived experience. So in fact, in the learning needs analysis we conducted at the beginning of last year, staff rated their experience of digital technologies within the NHS as a worker, as a member of staff, at about 6 out of 10. It does vary slightly depending on what staff group you're in, but broadly speaking, people are, it's not terrible, but people are on average detractors of their experience of technology within the NHS. We have got some indication as to why that might be. So firstly, every new digital initiative is more likely to fail than succeed. This has been established in a large number of studies. My favourite work was done by the Boston Consulting Group that did this piece of work looking at almost 900 different digital transformations, and they established that 70% of them failed to meet the benefits they initially intended to meet. 26% failed to meet even half of the benefits that they intended to meet. There is not data like this that is limited to the NHS, but I would posit to you that I think it's unlikely that a public sector industry of high complexity, which is exactly what the NHS is going to be doing better than the rest of the world and all other industries. I think we'd probably be a bit left shifted on this graph. I think it's not unreasonable to suppose that our failure rate is higher. We also know why those failures happen. We spend a huge amount of time making sure we choose the right technology, but only about 1 in 5 failures are ascribed to that technology. About 1 in 5 are ascribed to budgetary constraints. Fully 3 in 5, or 63%, if you look at the circled elements here, are either down to culture or down to technical digital skills deficits, things that we could potentially address by education. The staff in the NHS kind of recognise this. So the vast majority of the people we surveyed, 98%, identified that they wanted to develop digital skills and that they were important for their job over the next 5-year period. I can't see all of you, so I'm not going to ask for a quick show of hands, but normally I'd ask if anyone's heard of CLASS or the Arch Collaborative. It's the richest. Oh, I saw one thumb up there. That's good. It's the richest data set on digital implementation in any industry anywhere in the world. It is phenomenal. The depth of the data from this survey is amazing. This is some data that's for a few years ago now. I think it's 2021. At the time, there were 203 different healthcare organisations that submitted staff data from a total of 40,000 clinicians. It was actually. It's broadened out slightly in its application this time around in the NHS, but at the time it was just looking at feedback within healthcare organisations that have employed a electronic patient record, as they call them in the States, electronic health record. And they got that data from more than 40,000 clinicians. Each one of these blue bars is an organisation. How long that blue bar is demonstrates the proportion of staff who were satisfied with the electronic patient record that they had employed in their organisation. The big thing that comes out of the CLASS data at the moment is that there is a low correlation between the choice of electronic patient record, the choice of product, and the satisfaction of staff. So each of these bars is joining the lowest and the highest of organisations that use exactly the same electronic patient record. And there is a big old gap there. In fact, if you crunch the numbers, about 30% of staff satisfaction with an EPR is actually down to the choice of EPR, the functionality, the product. Everything that we think of as being electronic patient record, only 30% of staff satisfaction is down to it. Now, we also know what things are equally or even more strongly correlated to satisfaction with an EPR. It's things like leadership and direction. It's things like optimization. It's things like avoidance of unproductive charting and other what's considered waste. Training has a very big difference. If you offer clinicians only 1 hour's training every year, you see about a 17-point on average difference in staff satisfaction. It goes from a negative score to a positive score, and quite significantly. And reliability and speed, so infrastructure, makes a massive difference to staff satisfaction with an electronic patient record. Globally, the UK is not doing great. We've got some more up-to-date statistics now, but it has not moved massively, actually. We're in the bottom decile globally for staff satisfaction with electronic patient records. And these failures, not just with EPR, but in terms of all digital transformation, have a huge opportunity cost. We estimate that if you take 60% of change in the NHS could be underpinned by digital. There's no good evidence, by the way. I ask straw polls at meetings like this, and that figure comes from about 200 or 300 people within the NHS who have estimated the proportion of change that's underpinned by digital. So if we take 60% of all change, 70% of those changes failing, and 63% of those failing changes failing for reasons that we could address through education, that means that 26% of all change activity in the NHS could be changed from failure to potential success if people behaved differently. And those behaviour changes are brought about in part by the education that we could provide, and they will include things like capability and mindset changes. That's what we define as digital skills, the stuff that makes that 26% of digital projects successful rather than failing. If I put some figures onto that, and this is very conservative back of a fag packet calculations, if I just look at the 26% of digital transformations that are in the woe category, assume that 26% of digital transformations in the NHS are in a similar category, that fail to realise more than half of their benefits. We spend about £9 billion a year on digital. Probably about half of that is on digital transformation. The other half is on business as usual services. If we multiply that by the 26% of those transformations or that spend that is in that woe category, and the waste that we see in terms of missed opportunity, so the 50% of benefits that are not realised, multiplied by the 63% of those projects that are likely to be addressed by education, we think that an organisation like the Digital Academy, or education in general, I should probably say, the Digital Academy is one of many, could save the NHS £368 million a year. That feels to me to be very conservative an estimate. If I give you an entirely different estimate, just looking at electronic patient records, it's estimated that the NHS wastes about £1.5 billion every single year on unproductive charting. That, incidentally, is definitely something that can be fixed. There are some organisations that report no loss, no unproductive charting. And if you can do it once, you can do it in other places as well. So this is definitely something that we could teach people how to do better. The other data set I'd like to share with you is that digital failures also create problems. They create harm. And we do have some data on this. There is a great JAMA paper on the link between satisfaction of electronic patient records and its correlation to clinical safety and patient harm. I'm not going to go into that right now. What I will highlight is that within our learning needs analysis, we identified that digital failures created lots of problems for our staff. The ones that I'm currently concentrating most of these foundational challenges, and in particular the fear and lack of confidence in use of technology. We think that 5% of NHS staff have got no essential digital skills whatsoever. They will struggle to turn on a computer, struggle to use a device. And that's going to be that is already a real problem in running modern day organisations. I'll touch upon that in just a second, but there are other issues. For the sake of speed, I won't go through them all. We do have a significant amount of research on this, by the way. If you want to look at some of the quotes, which I'm just going to dot up but not give you time to read, they're all included in our learning needs analysis. If you're interested, I'll put a little link to that in the chat a little later. This is what I wanted to show you. So there's a correlation between reported satisfaction with electronic patient record and reported staff burnout, particularly clinician burnout. Organisations that score worst for satisfaction with an EPR have got more than twice the burnout rate than those organisations that score the least. Now, this is not causation, it is correlation, and there are other things that will clearly dovetail. You know, poorly managed organisations might be poorly staffed, as well as having a poorly implemented electronic patient record. So there are correlations, and what I don't want to do is draw a causative link here. But what I will demonstrate, well, what I will assert is that if we are better in trying to implement digital technologies in general, I think we're likely to have an impact on staff well-being. So just to summarize, we pulled together a little logic model. If our end ambition is to support the NHS to deliver more value and less harm through its use of digital technologies, our research has indicated that that's broadly speaking addressed by two things. So firstly, the NHS having the staff who have the confidence and competence to be able to use the digital technologies we ask them to use on a day-to-day basis, and secondly, for those digital technologies to be both usable and available. A whole bunch of people reported to us they didn't have access to the digital tools or the devices they need to do their job. Now, those two different problems have got different people that we're trying to influence and educate to address them. So supporting all staff is is clearly about all staff upskilling, but we're very much also working with the educators in local organisations to help inform and educate them on how to work with frontline staff better to build that confidence and competence. And there's quite a rich body of knowledge that's developing on how we might do that better. For the making sure that digital technologies are both available and usable, we think there are two broad groups. There are digital and data professionals who need to be better organised. That includes clinical informaticians, I might add, and clinical leaders, clinical digital leaders like yourselves. But also how we support generalist managers, people who hold a budget but don't necessarily have a digital background to make the right decisions because they're increasingly buying technologies. Finally, senior leaders, whether it be the sort of chief information officer, chief clinical information officer, or board level leaders, set the right culture and enable the investments in these things to happen, or indeed not happen, as the case may be. And so they're a really important group for us to try and influence and educate through things like our digital boards program. Finally, I'm just going to show you a couple of other slides, just giving you a little idea of where some of this data comes from. This is it's from Lloyds Bank. Every single year, Lloyds Bank produce something called the Consumer Digital Index. They interview a whole bunch of people up and down the country, and then they analyse that data based on the 20 essential digital skills for work as agreed by the UK government. There are correlations between things like age, highest qualification, seniority, and salary, but the strongest correlation with basic digital literacy, the proportion of digital skills, essential digital skills that you might have, is the industry in which you work. And the healthcare industry, what they've called medical here, that's not what they mean healthcare, is definitely in the bottom half. That means on average, people working in the NHS are less digitally literate than the people who we treat. As I mentioned, there's a really strong set of data now to indicate that even a small amount of training might make quite a big difference to staff satisfaction with EPRs, which we know has a correlation to things like burnout rate, staff wellbeing, but also patient safety. 1 hour a year. And we've also got some data, this is from Gartner, to demonstrate that in about 2020, there are more people than not in organisations now who are employing technology, not as users, but as commissioners or implementers of technology in organisations. It's probably less than that in the NHS. I don't think it's true that 50% of people are using technologies more at work and they bring them to work. Having said that, in COVID, we saw a massive upsurge of consumer technologies like WhatsApp and other messaging apps. People are finding ways to use technologies they can access at home to use at work. And that's happening more and more, which is both an opportunity and a challenge. For me, what that means is there's a tipping point from people who are the proportion of people in a typical organization who are users to those who are implementers. And that means I need to teach a different set of skills to a growing group of people. So in conclusion, if you're a staff member in a healthcare organization, it is your job's not going to stay static. It's your duty to learn and try and foster that sort of desire to learn, provide people with the tools and the education to enable them to do so continuously is my job, my part of that. If you're an educator, it's your duty to teach. So increasingly, digital skills are becoming a part of what digital educators are being asked to tackle, or educators in general are asked to tackle, but they've told us that they don't know how to. If you run a service, that's these people who are non-digital professionals, but maybe are budget holders or service owners or clinical leads. We need to help them make the right decisions, and we need to help them try and not see technology as just a bit of kit they can buy. When you start implementing this stuff without thinking through it, how you implement it, then you end up getting really bad results and contributing to that burnout issue. If you're a digital professional, it's your duty to make the right digital decision. We need to support people to do that much better through the development of the digital data and technology frameworks and the education that underpins it. And finally, if you're a leader, it's your duty to help as many people make as many of the right improvements as possible, by which I mean focusing on things like culture, decision-making, prioritization, all of which are the focus of our digital boards, and to an extent, other leadership products like the Digital Health Leadership Program. So sorry, that was a little bit of a canter. I think, Connor, Kevin does have these slides, so if people want them, you're welcome to use them. You're welcome to disseminate as you see fit. If you want to sign up to our newsletter, there's a QR code on screen, and of course there will be in the slides when they come round. And if you want to contact me directly, there are my contact details.